In the novel A Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Boy Soldier, Ishmael Bea retells his own life story. Ishmael grows up in Sierra Leone with his family, but when the threat of war becomes more imminent, he is forced to run away from home, eventually becoming separated from them. Ishmael spends months running from the rebel soldiers of the Revolutionary United Front and happens upon a town run by the government army. Soon, Ishmael must join the government army as a child soldier to escape death. From the beginning of his story, it seems impossible that Ishmael can escape unscathed by the unfathomable realities of the war. Everyone in Ishmael's story seems to have an inevitable path to follow, because the war causes a sudden shift throughout the entire country. As the story progresses, it becomes clear that illogically formed cultural expectations during the war predetermine the future of every Sierra Leonean, regardless of gender and age. This first becomes clear through Ishmael's interactions with older men. If these men are not physically agile, the rebel soldiers have no respect for them and often kill them. Ishmael notes this change in power dynamic when the war begins, and he says,
Before the war, a young man would have dared to talk to anyone older in such a rude manner. We grew up in a culture that demanded good behavior from everyone, especially from the young. Young people were required to respect their elders and everyone in the community.
Men also cease valuing their own lives when the war begins and stop trying to avoid death. As Ishmael travels through abandoned towns, he passes many men who sit on their porches awaiting rebel soldiers who will most certainly kill them. Women are also given specific paths to follow when the war begins. They are either kept as hostages by the rebels to hold off the military from invading rebel camps, or they are kept by soldiers to cook meals. Even babies and young children's futures are clearly outlined with the onset of the war. In one instance, Ishmael says,
The last casualty we saw that evening was a woman who carried her baby on her back, her child had been shot dead as she ran for her life.
This child serves as a symbol of all children in the war in Sierra Leone. Because of their lack of contribution to the war, young children are of absolutely no value to rebels and are killed. When the war begins, the demographic with the most clearly outlined future is young boys. Ishmael makes his fate clear when he says,
We knew we had no choice. We had to make it across the clearing because, as young boys, the risk of staying in town was greater for us than trying to escape. Young boys were immediately recruited, and the initials of RUF were carved wherever it pleased the rebels.
In addition to having to avoid rebel soldiers, young boys suddenly have to fear everyone. Even civilians try to fight, capture, or kill young boys because they are under the impression that all boys are part of the RUF. When the war begins, it is known that it will never be escaped by young boys. Ishmael states,
You can never escape from the RUF because escaping with the carving of the rebels' initials was asking for death. As soldiers would kill you without any questions, and the military would do the same.
The ongoing atmosphere and feeling of inevitability and inescapability created by Ishmael in his writing gives the impression that even if the boys run as far and as long as they can, they will eventually become child soldiers anyways as a result of living in Sierra Leone during wartime. When Ishmael does finally join the army as a result of the expectations placed on him by soldiers, he is expected to be able to adjust to it immediately. They have guns placed in their hands, and they go out into battle, where they are expected to not be fazed by the horrors of war. After Ishmael's first experience in battle, when he sees one of his friends killed, he says,
I stayed up all night and couldn't sleep for a week. We went out 2 more times that week, and I had no problem shooting my gun.
The contrast between Ishmael's first and following battle experiences highlights how army expectations play a massive role in Ishmael's life. Evidently, as demonstrated by the cultural expectations suddenly imposed on men, women, and children of all ages, the outbreak of war predetermines the futures of everyone. Ultimately, those who are physically able to contribute to war efforts have very few choices. Either they are forced into working for the rebels or the government, or they are left to fend for themselves in uncharted territory. The war takes away the basic human right of freedom of choice and causes entire populations to succumb to violence and a life of horror.